Today, we're going to be learning from Jose Capablanca, the third world champion. We're going to be looking at a game where he won in only 20 moves. A lot of these principles and ideas will apply in your own game, so make sure you pay close attention. This is episode 24 in a series where we're going through this book, Logical Chess, move by move. Let's get started. So Capablanca is white. He plays d4. And we have knight to f6 and c4. Very common continuation. If your opponent stops you from playing e4, you can play c4 and still get a nice grip on the center, and that is what Capablanca does here. e6, knight to c3, threatening now to play e4 and getting this nice big pawn center. And black decides to play what's called the Nimzo-Indian defense. Now, the Nimzo-Indian, the main idea is that you neutralize this knight on c3. Notice it's pinned. A lot of times you actually will trade that bishop for that knight, and you gain control over these light squares on d5 and e4 become weaker for white because the knight is no longer involved. But that comes at a cost. Usually you do give up the bishop pair, and we get some really interesting positions. So Capablanca immediately threatens e4 again with queen to c2, and also defends his knight. Sometimes you will recapture with your queen instead of your pawn to avoid the doubled pawns on c4. Okay, so queen to c2. Black plays c5, just striking at the center right away, and Capablanca simply trades the pawn. And one of the nice things about trading is that he doesn't waste any time, because black at some point in the future, maybe not right now, but at some point he's going to have to recapture that pawn, and he's going to have to waste time recapturing. And so he keeps the initiative essentially when he trades like that. He doesn't even pause to defend, just goes ahead and trades it off. And one of the themes that you're going to see in this game is how quickly Capablanca develops all of his pieces to their ideal squares. He doesn't really slow down at all in this game, and that's something that you want to remember when you're playing as well. Okay, so he takes the pawn. Black plays knight to c6, developing a piece, and knight to f3. And the author mentioned something interesting here that I want to share with you. He says, a lot of amateurs want things to happen, and this is kind of the phase of the game where they're going to start looking to make threats and look for tactics and try to find some brilliant move. But he says, the great master in the same situation is content to make simple moves. He knows that if he keeps on bringing pieces into play, there will be no need to look for winning combinations. They will evolve naturally out of the position and spring up all over the place. He's basically saying, look, just develop your pieces, put them to good squares, and then once you're fully, developed, that's when you look for the tactics and the combinations. But if you do it too early, that's where a lot of beginners can get into trouble. Okay, so keep that in mind in your own games. So bishop takes c5. Black decides to go ahead and grab the pawn now that was sitting there. Bishop to f4. Notice how all of Capablanca's last couple of moves have been develop the knight, develop the queen, develop the knight, develop the bishop with that one pawn trade. But other than that, he's just developing every single piece, right? d5, e3. Again, another developing move, right? You have to get the bishop out, so he immediately does that. Also defends here. Also blocks off this bishop from attacking the weak f2 square. And again, every single move has a purpose. Every single move has a point. He's trying to develop as quickly as he can. Black plays the move queen a5, and black has an idea here of trying to get doubled pawns on c3. And this is a common idea in the Nimzo-Indian, but he's spending a lot of time to do it, okay? And I want you to pay attention to the next couple of moves. So queen a5. Capablanca plays bishop to e2. Again, just developing. And if you're wondering why he didn't go bishop to d3, this is actually a good moment. If you would like to pause, what do you think black would have played if Capablanca went to the more aggressive bishop d3? Well, the move is knight to b4. And he's forking these pieces. And after the queen moves somewhere, he's going to simply take and he wins that bishop. And this is one of the nice attacking pieces for white in a lot of cases. And so just giving it up for the knight for really no other reason doesn't make a lot of sense. And if you thought, well, why didn't Capablanca play something like a3, trying to stop the knight from coming there and then go bishop to d3? Well, for one, this is actually a pin. That doesn't really help you. Black could still go there if they wanted. But for another, you're just wasting time. You don't really want to be making these pawn moves unless they're critical to developing your pieces. So like e3 was critical because you needed to move it to get the bishop out. But now he doesn't waste any time doing that. He just puts the bishop on the best square that he can, and at the same time avoids the little trick of knight to b4 where he'll have to lose his bishop. Okay, so let's keep going. Black plays bishop to b4, and he's going for the doubled pawns on c3, like I mentioned. So do you guys think Capablanca worries about this or not? Well, the answer is nope. He doesn't even worry about it. He just simply castles and he says, look, go ahead. If you want to trade, give me the doubled pawns. That's fine. Because why? And that's actually exactly what happens. He takes back with the pawn. And the author makes the note here that yes, black did succeed in kind of messing up the pawn structure. But what does white have in return for that? Well, he lists out 7 things. Okay. Number 1, he has the bishop pair. Okay. Remember, black had to give up one of the bishops to do that. These bishops, once the board kind of opens up, are going to be much more powerful than the knights in most cases. So that's the first thing. Second thing, all of white's minor pieces are developed, whereas black still has to develop this bishop. Okay. Third thing, white's rooks are already connected and in touch with each other, which is a great thing because they have maximum options as to where they can go to affect the game. Okay, which is always a good thing. Look at black's rooks still has quite a few moves before they can do the same thing. Number 4, white's king is nice and safe over here on the side of the board, castled behind this wall of pawns. He's got lots of pieces in front of it. There is no chance that black can attack his king right now. Black's king, on the other hand, not so safe. It's still sitting in the middle of the board. Number 5, white's queen is actually better positioned than black's queen. Okay, and yes, black's queen is doing some stuff. It's not terrible, but white's queen is actually affecting the center of the board, which usually is more important than on this side. Okay. Number 6, he says that an exchange of pawns in the center, which looks inevitable, will open lines of attack. So he's talking about this. Somehow these are going to get traded. Either black's going to take or white's going to take at some point. If you push, there's going to be some trades. You can't stop it. And when the position opens up, whoever has the lead in development, which is white, is going to, benefit from that. Okay. And then the 7th thing he says is he maintains the initiative. And as we see over the next couple of moves, now that he has developed completely, he's ready to start attacking, and every single move he's going to be making these threats, and black just can't deal with it. Okay, so a lot of things in return for those doubled pawns. Okay, so if you can get doubled pawns and not give up any of the other stuff, that's good. But if you have to do it at a cost, and I want to remind you, black's bishop went to b4, then it went back to capture the pawn, then it went back to b4, then it captured here. So he spent 1, 2, 3, 4 moves with that bishop just to take a knight that only moved 1 time. And that's really where the time was wasted for black, which turns out to not really be worth it in this game. Okay? All right, so how does the game proceed? Black decides to castle, which is good, gets the king out of the center. And Capablanca plays rook a to b1. Now, you might think, okay, we're attacking a pawn that's already defended. Why are we doing that? Well, we're kind of tying up the bishop to defend it, because if black says, well, I want to develop my bishop, well, then you just lost a pawn and now the rook invades on the 7th rank, right? So it's a way of sort of tying down this bishop, which is also messing up the rooks from communicating. It's causing black problems. And if black decides to try to play b6, there's other issues that you run into. For example, the queen can no longer go backwards, so it's kind of cut off. You weaken the knight here. And as an example of what might happen, there's this line, bishop to d6, attacks the rook. The rook moves. Rook to b5 attacks the queen, and that queen doesn't have a lot of places to go. Look at this. This is controlled. This is controlled. This is controlled. You don't really have anywhere to go except a6. You play queen a6, but then white captures, black captures. You take, they take. Knight to d4 hits the rook. This is a complicated line, so don't worry about, if you saw all this. But what you want to understand is what's going on with the queen. Look at this. Discovered attack on the queen. The queen now has to move. And after something like this, you've got bishop to f3, which is going to win some material because after knight d5, you take it. And there's a checkmate. Okay, now that was a long line. Like I said, I don't expect anybody watching this video to have calculated or seen all that. The point that you need to understand is that going back to this position, if black does play b6, the queen runs out of options and you get into trouble. Even though it's kind of complicated, that's the main takeaway. All right. So black decides to avoid that by playing the move queen to a3. Okay. And he wants to make sure that he gets control of that diagonal before white does, so that his queen has options. Like if he ever needs to come back or whatever, his queen doesn't get into trouble. Okay. So that's the idea behind queen to a3. So now Capablanca plays rook f to d1, and Irving mentions that at this point, all of white's pieces have been developed to their ideal squares with only 1 move each. He literally spent one move on each of these pieces. Queen went to c2 immediately, bishop went to f4 immediately, knight went to f3 immediately, bishop went to e2 immediately, went here, went here. He didn't waste any time moving any of these pieces more than once. In black, remember we talked about it earlier, the bishop was kind of bouncing around 4 different times, right? The queen now has moved, multiple times. That is why he has this advantage from seemingly doing nothing. He just quickly developed those pieces, okay? It's very, very critical that you understand that. So black plays the move b6 now. He feels like his queen is safe enough. He wants to develop his bishop, but he couldn't because that rook, so he plays b6. And I think here is a good moment for you guys to pause and think through, what do you think Capablanca would do next? Well, he actually trades here. Now, why is he trading? He wants to start opening up the position. Remember, when you open up the position, the player who is more developed is going to have an advantage. White's pieces are ready to go. Black is still trying to get the pieces into the game, and white is ready. So if you wait another move, which I think a lot of people might do, like, well, let me play h3, and let me see, maybe I'll move my king, or maybe I'll shuffle my rooks, or try to double my rooks, or do something really slow, you're going to give black time to develop. They're going to move their bishop and bring their rooks to wherever they want, and all of a sudden you have an equal game. So Capablanca is saying, no, I'm not going to wait around for that. I'm ready. Now is the moment to start the trading and the opening up of the lines and start the attack, essentially, right? So that's why he goes ahead and trades at this moment in the game. Black recaptures with the knight, and again, if you would like to pause, this is where there's just a sequence of really nice moves that Capablanca finds, and this is good kind of practice to see if you can find some of these. All right, if you had a chance to look at that, the move is knight to g5, and he's immediately kind of paying attention to the weaknesses that were created in black's position by this knight recapture, right? The pawn on h7 that's normally defended is no longer defended, so he attacks it, but he's doing more than just hoping for a one-move checkmate. Obviously, black is going to see this. These are two strong players, right? Black's not going to just be like, oops, I didn't see the checkmate. The point is, well, you guys tell me, what's the point? Well, hopefully you said he's trying to induce weaknesses in black's kingside, either by g6 or f5, and because when those pawns move forward, they can never go backwards, and you create permanent weaknesses, okay? So, for example, if black were to play g6, which they did not, but if they were to, the dark squares are now weak. So if this would have happened, what should you have played here as white? This is important that you understand this next move. Get a chance to look at that. The move is bishop to g3. Now, why would you play a retreating bishop move like this in this position? Because remember, black's dark squared bishop has already been traded, which means our dark squared bishop is extremely powerful on controlling these dark squares around black's king. So we don't want to allow black's knight to simply take it. Okay, this is one of our most valuable attacking pieces once g6 has been played. So the first thing that we are going to do is make sure we save that bishop. Then we'll worry about kicking this knight away, maybe kicking this knight away, and then eventually this bishop and the queen are going to come in, and we're probably going to checkmate the king somehow. The knight can also jump in. There's lots of different ways, but the first step is make sure you don't lose that bishop, okay? So in the actual game, black didn't play g6. Instead, they played the move f5. And by the way, one more thing I want to point out. On knight to f6, just trying to defend this way, there's a nice move for white here. What is it? Hopefully you said bishop to d6. There's a little tactic there where there is a fork because now the rook is defending the bishop. Okay, so you always want to be scanning and looking for those tactics that can pop up out of nowhere. All right, so because of that, black said, no, let me just go with f5, trying to shut down the checkmate this way. All right, so what do you think Capablanca played next? Well, if you had a chance to think about that, the move is bishop to f3. And when you're attacking, one thing that I like to try to do a lot of times is look at which piece is kind of not doing as much as it could be doing, and how can you improve the position of maybe one of your worst pieces. So if you kind of look around, like, this rook's actually pretty good, this rook's actually pretty good, the knight's pretty good, that's a kind of an aggressive place, this bishop looks like a pretty nice diagonal, this one is kind of like, yeah, it's not bad here, but notice how as soon as he goes to f3, it's like, okay, all of a sudden now you've got some very serious threats happening. This knight's undefended, so black has to be careful for that. There's a rook sitting back there. They have to be careful for that. Seems like it's very easy that maybe we could chase this away. There's even, actually, if you look carefully, a tactic already available. Rook takes, pawn takes, bishop takes with check, and then you get another knight. You end up getting so many pieces for your rook. That's a great trade. And so just immediately, this move puts so much pressure on the black's position. Okay, and that is what strong players do. They're always able to find the most powerful move available to them, and that's what they play. And that's exactly what Capablanca does here. All right, so black plays the move queen to c5, which is a very nice looking defensive move, actually, because he's defending the knight here. He's defending the knight here. He's just getting the queen, closer to the center of the board. It just seems like it's a really good move. So how did Capablanca proceed? Well, the move that he played was c4, and this is an interesting move because if you look carefully, there's not actually a threat on this knight because the queen is sitting here. It's a pin. Right? You can't even take that. You just lose your queen. So why would he go here if he's not even threatening to take the knight? The answer is he wants rook to b5 because rook to b5 forces the queen away, and guess what? Then he will take the knight. So he is threatening the knight, kind of, but not in the way that you immediately might think. It's actually because of there's rook b5 follow-up. So very, very clever move, kind of really making use of almost every piece, right? He used the knight and the queen to initiate the attack and force this. He's using the bishop to cause the queen to retreat. Now he's using the pawn and this rook along with this rook. Like all the pieces are playing a role in different ways. It's really quite fascinating and a beautiful game when you think about it. So c4 is played, and black plays knight d to b4 to get away from the tactics involved with losing the knight. Also stops rook b5 and threatens the queen. So what do you think Capablanca played here? Well, he simply moves his queen, and he goes to b3. Now, one thing that I want to point out, because I think a lot of people might think, okay, queen b3, what's the point? Like, what's he doing? Well, for one, he's putting pressure on the knight. So, like, if this guy ever tries to move, which you can't anyway, but if you did, there's going to be a knight hanging. But he's also lining up on the king, and this is an important point. Sometimes when you look at a chessboard, you're like, okay, there's so many pieces in between. There's just no way that this queen is actually going to play a meaningful role in attacking the king, right? That's kind of what it looks like. But I want you to remember this moment and remember when the game finishes later, like how we got here, okay? So sometimes just lining up on those diagonals or files, it's setting up for the future is basically what's happening, okay? So that's what's going on with queen b3. So black plays the move e5, actually, and he's attacking the bishop. And trying to, kind of maybe play e4 at some point in the future, just shut down some of these bishops, because the bishops are just really wreaking havoc here in black's position. So what did Capablanca do about this? You got a chance to look at that. The move is a3. And it has to do, actually, believe it or not, with the fact that the queen is now lined up on the king. See, as soon as e5 is played, this becomes so much more of a powerful threat. And what he's doing is saying, look, if you want to take my bishop, go ahead. Because guess what? I'm going to take back, attack your queen. Once the queen moves somewhere, guess what I'm going to do? Well, for one, you could just take the knight for free. But you can also start thinking about c5 and some very serious threats here. Okay? And actually, I guess it's actually more the fact that there's this knight here, which is even the bigger threat now that I really look at this. So, for example, you lose a piece, you get a piece, which is just an even trade. But at the end of that, sorry, that's what happened in the game. At the end of that, you attack the queen, which has to move, and you get the knight because there's nowhere that the queen can move to defend the knight. If you look at this carefully, queen can't go there, you just take it. Queen can't go here, queen can't go here because of the rook. And so you have to lose 2 pieces for the 1 bishop. Okay? So black sees what's going on and decides to play knight to a6 instead. All right, if you want to pause here, Capablanca played one more move which caused his opponent to resign. What move did he play and why? If you had a chance to look at that, the move is bishop takes c6. And of course, you're attacking the rook, so black doesn't have time to take you. They have to take your bishop. And right here, black resigned. But if they would have taken the bishop, you see the follow-up. All right, well, if you had a chance to look at that, it all comes back to the queen sitting on b3, which is lined up with the king. And there's actually a very famous checkmate pattern here called the smothered checkmate. And it's a super nice one. You don't get to do it often, but when you do, man, is it nice. So c5 check. And if you notice, any block is going to just lose material, right? Because you're just going to take it. So the king might try to step over, but then you jump in. Again, if you take here, you're going to be losing material. Actually, no, it's just checkmate. Now that I say that, there's just a back rank checkmate. So that's why you can't take the knight. So you have to move back. And this is where the smothered checkmate happens. If you've never seen this before and you want to pause and try to find the checkmate, it's checkmate in 3 moves for white. There's nothing that black can do about it. All right, if you had a chance to look at that, it's knight to h6, and this is a double check. And it's very important that it's double check, because otherwise black would just simply be able to take your knight. If that was the only piece checking the king, they would just take you, right? But because the queen is also checking, you can't do that. Whenever you're in double check, you have to move your king off of the square. That's the only way. And now you can jump in with the queen, attacks the king, forces the rook to take, because the king can't take because the knight is sitting here, right? You have to take with the rook, and you've surrounded the opponent's king, and the knight jumps in for what's called the smothered checkmate. You can see why that's such a nice one. You give up the queen, and you deliver the checkmate with the knight. So really, really nice. That's what could have happened if the opponent didn't resign. But what do we learn from this game, right? In 20 moves, he caused the opponent to resign by quickly developing his pieces, by attacking immediately once his troops were mobilized. He didn't wait around. And by finding some nice little tactics and ideas along the way, right? That is the formula for a successful game. So I hope you guys enjoyed that. This was game 24. Next time it's game 25 on page 166 in the book Logical Chess Move by Move. And I will see you guys next time. Stay sharp, play smart, take care.